Hello and welcome to Movie Buffs, a show where the action is the juice and where we live our lives a quarter mile at a time. I'm your host, Cisco from Misfit Minded. You can follow me on all the socials at misfit_minded and my website, misfitminded.com.
And I'm your other host, Shani B. You can find me on all the socials at It's Me, Shani B.
Each week we take the red pill and use our certain set of skills to break down the best action films of all time. Today we're talking about the 1994 film, The Crow.
In a world without justice, one man was chosen to protect the innocent and to make the wrong things right.
It's not a good day to be a bad guy.
The film the critics are calling dazzling and fiercely hypnotic.
Bye-bye, Birdie.
Brandon Lee is sensational. A triumph. Brandon Lee.
I love you.
The Crow. Rated R. Now playing at theaters everywhere.
All right, if you haven't seen it, it's about a musician who comes back to life 1 year after he and his fiancee are brutally murdered to seek vengeance on his attackers. To get this bullet train started, take the listeners back to May 13th, 1994, made for an estimated $23 million and grossed a total of $50 million, making it the number one movie that week. Other notable releases include When a Man Loves a Woman at number 2, Spike Lee's Crooklyn at number 3, Four Weddings and a Funeral at number 5, Three Ninjas Kick Back at number 6,
Let's
and
go.
Schindler's List in its 22nd week at number 10. That brings us
Fantastic.
to our next segment called Getting the Band Back Together.
Yes.
I don't have friends. I got family.
In this segment, we'll take a slow-mo look at the filmmaking choices that went into the film and the ass kickers responsible. This movie was written by David J. Show, a horror writer who worked on the Creepshow TV series, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and
Texas Chainsaw the beginning.
the beginning, my bad.
Pretty cool.
And also John Shirley, who's also a TV writer, mostly known for animated shows like Batman Beyond and Spawn, and directed by Alex Proyas, who's done a lot of commercials and music videos. He also did Dark City and iRobot.
Yeah, so
What do you think?
I think this is a pretty good movie. Obviously, probably its biggest legacy is the tragedy of Brandon Lee, who
Yep.
died during this movie. It's very eerie, like to watch it like now, just because like the whole thing is about death and like coming back and like the legacy you leave behind. Like I actually think it like this sounds like creepy, I guess to say, but it like makes it work even more. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Because there's like there's a meta text to it where the message of it is like love lasts longer than us or
Right.
whatever. So I think that like this movie was like going to like shoot him into superstardom pretty much. Like you saw all the rave reviews in the commercial and everything like that. Like this was going to be his jumping off point.
Yep.
And so I do think that like when you watch this, you can just feel like this is a star making performance. And then even though he didn't get a career after this, which is sad, I do think it's still like a very touching like tribute to him in a way that he got to like pull this role off, which is what movies are in a way. Like they capture these people, these actors forever,
Yeah.
on film. Even after they pass away, we have this like record of a time in their lives and a performance. So, what did you think of that when you were watching it?
I mean, I was thinking about, how strange it is to watch a movie that has this kind of, story hanging over it. And I agree, the parallels that are there are really interesting. And, like he is an artist within the story as well. His music is something that outlasts him in a way that the, young gal character is able to remember him through and recognize him through in a way. And there's just something really interesting about, how all those parallels kind of come together and just like how Hollywood can have has a history of like accidents and things like this happening on sets, and it's just like it's a bummer to be reminded of them and to like go so far back in the past and sort of see like, yeah, people have such promise, they have something ahead of them, in front of them, and that's just not going to get to be realized, which is just really a downer. Even though this movie is like very cool in its gothic undertones at the same time. So there's also something that's kind of nice about that, where like this isn't just a straight drama necessarily. He does get to look really cool and do really cool things and shine.
Yeah, I think yeah, it works on, like, that level too, and then, like, the other meta text level to it, of course, is, like, that Bruce Lee was his dad,
Yep.
and Bruce Lee also died under, like, very weird circumstances, so there's, like, this Lee family curse,
Yep.
conspiracy that you can go into the rabbit hole, with, but, um, yeah, it's just very weird and, makes it, like, hard to talk about. I mean, even this is, like, the new 30th anniversary,
Right.
4K, like, they don't really talk about it at all, it's
Mhm.
kind of just, like, this kind of weight that, like, floats around the movie, but
Right.
no one really talks about it in any, like, specific detail, and I was thinking too of the Alec Baldwin accident
Yes.
that just like, that's this stuff still happens today,
Same.
you know, um, which is sad, but, I will say that just, like, a quick thing of, like, the 4K, I thought it looked really great, and, like, the new special features, I was able to, like, watch pretty much all of them,
Nice.
and I thought, like, they were like nice they gave nice detail about like how the film was made. Of course, I like the Brandon Lee like archival footage, because again, usually I just know him through this performance. Like I don't really get to see that ever, but like the way he speaks is like so eloquent. Like he sounds like so smart and like dude was just like ripping off like quotes from authors about like mortality and stuff like that. I was just like, whoa, this is not like
He
what you
did the
would think.
work.
I know, and so, it reminded me a lot, I don't know if you got this too, of, like, Heath Ledger in
Yeah.
Dark Knight, like,
Yes.
how when you're saying putting in the work, right, one of the things that like, came across in the research is that he didn't like how the makeup looked when they first put it on him, so then the team was like, "Why don't you put it on yourself every day?" And like I'm pretty sure Heath Ledger had kind of the same thing where he was shooting himself sometimes and like he was, very hands-on with his own routine to get that
Mhm.
character right. And you just feel it. Like there's just certain moments, which we'll talk about like with the performances more, that you can tell he's just making these big swings.
Yeah.
Um, I think even beyond that though, I'll just bring up some of this stuff. Like this was based on a comic book, which I think is pretty obvious. Like when you watch the movie, it's very stylish, very
Totally.
stylized.
Mhm.
Um, so this another thing they kept kind of dancing around in the special features, which I had to go and look up because they never talk about it. Um, maybe because they do interview him. That's one of the ones I didn't get to watch. Maybe he does talk about it.
Okay.
I have to watch it still. But so the author of the comic, James O. Barr, he was inspired to write the story because his wife or his fiance was killed by a drunk driver. So then he joined the Marine Corps to cope with it and started learning how to illustrate there. And then that's how he picked up on those skills. And then he used the crow to kind of like work through it,
Yeah.
and to like grieve through it. And so I think it's very like affecting movie, and so like on so many levels. And I do think like that kind of gets across, like even in the writing, that like you could tell this is like a very personal
Yeah.
story. And he was also inspired by a Detroit newspaper that talked about like the murder of a young couple over an engagement ring, like a $20 engagement ring. So that's where that part of the story comes
Yeah.
from as well.
Yeah,
Um,
this movie I feel like reflects a lot on senseless violence. It's like trying to reconcile, that uh, when that happens and how it affects people, and
yeah,
it's really trying to, instead of glorifying the violence, even though obviously it's like very cool, so in some ways it can't help but do that anyway, because he is getting vengeance, and we want that for him essentially. It's still, he is still really highlighting and identifying that like it's senseless, and like anarchistic violence is stupid. Like
yeah.
it's a waste.
Yeah, I was also, like, thinking about, like, because there's a new Crow too we should bring up.
That's
There's
right.
been countless sequels, and there's a remake coming out now.
Yep.
Um, and I was just thinking about, like, the backlash of it because people I mean, it doesn't look very good, I'm gonna be honest,
Yeah.
and people are not excited about it, I'm not excited about it.
Same.
But, like, if you could even make this movie today, you know what I mean? Like, because it is so 90s and so punk rock,
V
and
90s.
before everything was, like, had to be IP and you know what I mean? Like, it just
Yeah.
feels they're even talking I laughed at one part in the special features, one guy was like, "I don't think film has really dipped into comic books yet, into that medium."
Right?
From
Right?
the '90s, and I was like, "Bro, it's like it's so over now." Like, that whole thing,
Yeah, 30
it
years
that
later, here's where we are.
yeah, and, like, at the time, if you put yourself in '94, like, the only movies I could really compare it to in terms of, like, the look and feel would be, like, Batman.
Right.
That's the one that came to mind the most.
Yes.
Um,
Same.
I read Roger Ebert's review, he loved the movie, and he also compared it to Blade Runner, but he was also, like, very impressed with, like, the design work that they did, and I think that has to do with the director's music video background too. Like, you can tell it
Right.
has this musical feel. They got the music from, like, The Cure, it was just such a specific moment, this underground punk scene, and I just don't think punk exists anymore, Like,
Mm,
I saw an ad that got targeted to me where it was like, "Buy this new Green Day Keurig machine because nothing is more punk rock than getting coffee with Green Day," or something, and I said, "No! That's, like, the opposite of what punk rock is supposed to be." Like, oh my god, like, but that's
yes.
even the punk rock bands that came up in that era are not punk anymore by their
Right.
definition, like, very weird. I don't know what they're gonna do with this new one, but
Yeah. I
we'll
think it
see.
like I think a lot of how like, when we're reviewing movies or when we're talking about IP continuing, like I'm not really sure why now or like why this property now, if you will. Especially after rewatching it when I'm sort of like it really still stands as it is.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it's dated or whatever, but that doesn't really matter because it doesn't set itself in a time, right? Like it's sort of
Yep.
like in a
Timeless.
world that is adjacent to reality, but it's not like they're like New York, 1994. Like
Yeah.
they don't plant themselves in some way that makes me be like, "Oh, I do want to see that updated." So I'm
Well,
just like kind of confused.
some of the stuff is mainstream now, you know what I mean? Like, the
Right.
vinyl players are listening to Vinyl is Back, and
Yep.
the band T-shirts that
Yep.
everyone wears, that stuff is, like, mainstream now, like, it's just a weird
Skateboarding,
time,
it's an Olympic sport. Like
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, man. So I guess the other thing that I thought was interesting in terms of the comic aspects is that, um, it's a black and white comic like Sin City, there's no
okay.
color in it, and
Ooh.
so which is really I think they do a nice job translating that in this movie, and I guess the only color in the comic is those, like, flashback scenes with his fiancée,
Makes
which they
sense.
also do in the movie, like, this is a color movie, to be
Yeah.
clear, but it's, like, all shades of black and wet rain, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a not because like, that's one thing with the 4K format, which is nice, is, like, you see a lot more detail in shadow.
Right.
The one thing that 4K brings, which is, like, that enhanced color palette, this Crow is not the movie that I would recommend for that, It's just not
Uh-huh.
a lot of
That's
color
good to
for it
know.
to show off.
Right.
But it still looks really good, like, it still holds up. There's no, like, effects that, like, took me out ever. This still feels like a very real
Nice.
world, like you said, that is just a little far off. Like, I guess, like, Blade Runner would be, like, a pretty easy comparison, or Gotham, like we
It really
said.
does seem like it's where Blade Runner and Batman like meet each other
Me
or something. It really
Yeah.
does.
And Detroit, like, in Detroit too, which always gets depicted in this way, but it is
Yes.
I mean, it's a stereotype. Some other people that they talk to on the features, production designer Alex McDowell gets pretty lengthy, time
Mhm.
talking about like how he was inspired by film noir and theater. And I looked up his resume. He's done some of that we've done on this show, and some of our favorites: Fight Club, Minority Report, Watchmen.
Yes.
These very genre heavy, dark films. And then the producers on it as well. He's been in the game for a long time. He came up with Brian De Palma, who was one of our favorites,
Let's go.
producing Fan of the Paradise and Sisters for him.
Ooh.
He also did Badlands, Terrence Malick's films, and then I guess some more newer ones would be like American Psycho, Drudge Dread, Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
And he passed away last year. He looked like he was getting up there on the features.
He'd
Like
been
it
working
was,
for
yeah,
a
like his
while.
it was taking a long time to get his thoughts out, which
That's
but
okay.
the one thing I thought was cool that he was talking about, which I guess goes with our Brandon Lee convo, was like that. He said the only like multi-picture deal that he ever had with his production company was with Arnold for Conan,
Uh-huh.
because at the time, getting more a lot of usage out of this Conan poster lately, I feel like.
Yes.
But if you remember when we did that episode, you can go back and listen. That was his first big break, and so a lot of people at the time thought that no Americans wanted to see somebody with that accent, and so he fought for Arnold
Right.
to secure that spot. And he said Brandon Lee was the only other one that would have had a multi-picture deal if he was alive after The
Of
Crow.
course.
And so again, I think that further cements that he would have gotten not like many opportunities to be a star. And like this is a very star-making performance. Like there's a lot going on. It's very loud. Like I was also thinking of like maybe like the Joker, like
Yeah.
other, not just Heath Ledger, like Joaquin Phoenix is the Joker. Like it's
Mhm.
you follow him the whole time, pretty much him and his crow.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
um, but I like that. I like that there's not a lot of, we get some narration and stuff like that, but I like that the world building is just you're following this guy on his journey, and you follow along with his like powers on the way. You don't
Yep.
need these like exposition dumps, which I
No.
hate. And even when the villains are like trying to speculate on what his powers are, they're never really sure, if it's
Yeah.
gonna work or not. It's all
Right.
like, so I don't know, I like that. I think, you can still feel like these are like sets, but they're like very well dressed and like beautiful sets to live in. Like
Yeah.
one like a painting of
Yep.
like a horrible city or something like that, but for some reason it's like cool to look at,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
It's
it's
interesting.
any other filmmaking things you want to talk about?
Yeah, yeah. I love the, the sweeping shots of the miniatures to like really build the city out. I love that you can tell that like while of course this is like shot on a lot because that's just what they're doing in the
Yeah.
90s, it's like they put so much into the design, and I love that they have such a seasoned production designer. I really love the like gothic grunge
Mhm.
apocalyptic kind of costume design, which I think lends itself to like no real space and time, just like this awareness of that, like whatever's happening in cities, whether it's the future or the past, it's jarring, and it's mostly centered around violence and like
Drug
uh
use.
drug use and low socioeconomic status, like
Yep,
stuff that every generation kind of faces for themselves. So that's why I feel like this is somewhat timeless in that way.
definitely.
um I really love that they use POV shots, like when
Mhm.
he is being murdered, because that
Oh,
like
I
is part of
love
his
the
memory.
crow POV is my favorite, dude. It's
Yes.
such a simple touch, but I think it adds so much to it, where it's just like, oh, you can see through a crow.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, all right, that's cool.
exactly. Yeah,
And they
it's like
use that in Game of Thrones. They go, it's still survived.
it has an influence. And I think that's how they get around having to do like weird exposition, is that like they use the POV and they use the filmmaking to help you understand it through perspective, which I think is really cool. There's great like, inserts when he's like dodging the knife, and POV is like sewn together really well. And I like the flash editing, which to your point, I think like has some real 80s, 90s music video vibes going.
I love
But yeah, I feel like,
the drug POV when stuff is like blending and turning like
yep,
together. And
exactly.
that one the kid's mom where she just turns and she's just like probably one of the best lines of the movie, like, "There's a big ass bird in here." Just like totally tripping balls on heroin, like,
Yep.
yeah, it's
But really trying to visually represent that stuff. And I think that's what you and I talk about the most in
yeah,
filmmaking is like, is the filmmaking in line with the storytelling? Is it telling, is everything working together really well? And I do think this movie has that going for it. Like its performance, its writing, the way it's executed and captured on film it all works well together.
definitely. Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to our next segment called Choose Your Fighter.
Welcome to the party, pal.
This is where we take a look at all the bros and babes that flex their acting muscles and sometimes their real muscles for us movie buffs. The film stars Brandon Lee, Ernie Hudson, Bai Ling, and Michael Wincott. Who do you want to talk about first? We've kind of already started with some of the performances, but wherever
Of
you want to take
course.
it.
Right, yeah, yeah, I mean, I love that it's Ernie Hudson who is, like, playing sort of the cop here. I know noir is, like, an element of the story, and I, like, loved the sound design, how it had both that '90s grunge rock, but, like, it would bring in some trumpet here and there and a little sax to be
Hmm.
like, "This is a noir," particularly around Ernie Hudson's character because he's, like, the cop who, is trying to make a difference in this city where it seems like there is no law, so upholding it is really hard.
And he's
I
the
really
audience like surrogate, I think. He's like the
Yes.
closest where, like we get it from Brandon Lee's perspective, Eric Draven's perspective, but as like a just a regular guy being like, "What the hell?" Like he just disappeared in the middle of nowhere.
Right, yes, yes.
Like that's again something they do in the Batman movies. When he
Yep,
disappears randomly and he's like, "Oh yeah, he does that." I'm like, "Wow, they just straight up took that line from
yeah.
The
He
Crow?"
perfectly helps
You know?
us with that suspension of belief that we kinda need here. Um,
Yeah.
I also love John Polito here, being, another just, like, grimy bad guy. If Dennis Franz isn't around, then he is here for us, which is fun.
Mhm.
He was also in so many things in the '90s, like, exactly as this guy. I liked the street kid, like, a little girl being a part of this story was interesting to me because, again, that's, like, another thing I feel like is very common in the '90s, '80s, '90s, including children in stories because it's like children are around this stuff too. They are a part of these kinds of stories, and so I always want to like highlight that like in modern movies they like forget about like what that perspective would be, but I think it's important here because like her mom, she's like sort of abandoned, and these people kind of take her in a way, and then she loses them too, and that makes the story more powerful, I think.
I
Um,
think you get, like I like like we talked about, to make it the story feel bigger and the city feel bigger, you get all these, like, random characters and, like, how they
yes.
intersect with each other. Like, the kid was familiar with Draven because she has his vinyl album, I love that, and
Yep.
she knows it's him because he says a lyric from the record, which again, that's, like, clever writing. That's, like, not
Yes.
like they don't really know each other, but she's like a fan because she's hanging around in these environments. Like I like that, I like that it didn't have to be like a direct connection, like that's our daughter or something. Like it's
Right.
and so
Yeah, it's sort
she's
of like we
yeah.
all know each other through the streets in one way
Hmm.
or another because we're all surviving.
Yeah, and then her mom works in the bar where all the bad guys hang out. Like I just like that that kind of storytelling. I just watched Magnolia for the first time, PTA
Nice.
Magnolia, and I just
Nice.
I'm in that mode right now of just like that movie in particular is 3 hours of characters that just like have all their messed up problems but are connected in the way that they're all messed up and they can't deal with their past.
Right.
So I just think that's always going to be like an effective way to tell stories if you can do it right, if you can pull it off.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And I really love Bai and Michael Wincott as like the big
Yeah.
bads here. Like Bai is just so wild, being like, "Let's
Speaking
do
of Game
these
of Thrones too,
spells.
there's some
Let's."
like ancestral this vibes
Yes.
going on. That's his sister,
Right.
and
Yep. They're trying to do powers and they're getting high off of eyeballs and cocaine, which you're like, what even could this mean? But it
it's
is like, when you get to a certain point where like you can do anything, you can have anything, and there's no one really to stop you. Of course, you're gonna get to these like extreme levels.
Yeah, I think it's, like, really smart too because they had to deal with, like, the supernatural element with it, and I feel like, they could have just gone, like, the normal bad guy route and being like, "You guys are fucking high out of your mind, like, what are you talking about?" Like,
Right.
there's no such thing, but because he has this chick who is, like, into spells and shit, that
Yep.
he doesn't need any convincing, like, he's
N
already bought in, like, "Alright, well,
and they
let
want power.
let's get this crow boy and let's
Yeah.
fuck him up," like, and
And let's
so
take his power too,
yeah.
right? Like, we're the baddest mofos up in here, you know?
So, I think that really worked well. Ernie
The henchman.
Hudson,
Oh, yes.
like you said, the only thing I put is that I don't know if you've seen him recently. The man is in his 70s, right?
Mhm.
And if you look up a picture of him now, he looks like he does in this movie, maybe even younger. It's
So,
so ridiculous.
he's the best. He is the best.
He was in a movie last year too. I watched recently, Champions with Woody Harrelson.
Oh,
He's got
yeah.
a
I
small
remember
part
that.
in that, and he's just yoked. He's like a college basketball coach, and he looks
Let's
like
go.
half his age. It's crazy. So
That's
I
awesome.
forgot he was in this movie. I thought he was really good as like he doesn't have a lot to do necessarily. But I think he has the right tone, where he's believing what they're going through while still having some skepticism. Like, let me still investigate.
Right.
No, I don't know what's going on. Um, and then yeah, the bad guys truly like some really great like character actors. I think they like when you're doing a comic book movie, it's always smart to just like cast people who look the part, like visually, like
Yes.
we're saying, because
Yes.
everyone they cast visually just has
Nails it.
that look,
Yep.
that this
Yep.
is a bad dude. I don't want to interact with them. So Michael Wincott, he has that long hair and that creepy ass voice. And he's as like a Resident Evil villain, and you're like, okay, yes, this guy would not want to fuck with this guy ever. Um,
Nope.
David Patrick Kelly, who we talked about in the Warriors, come out and play.
Right?
Always good for a weaselly bad guy. Uh,
Perfect.
Tony Todd,
Let's go.
Candyman up in this thing. Yeah,
Yep. Right? Like Candyman is a mystical kind of a
yeah,
character as
that's what I was
well
bringing
with
up. Like,
a
yeah,
strange kind of power in death. So it's amazing that he's here.
he also like had on the interview and the special features because I think this was before Candy.
I think Candyman could be 93. Let me
Yeah,
look it up.
maybe. Okay,
But I
but
could
he
be
he ta-
wrong.
he like says a metaphor and he brings up honey in it, and I'm like, bro, Tony Todd, are you plugging Candyman right now, or what's going on?
Always, dude. Candyman is 92.
Okay, yeah, I got it. I knew I got that wrong. Um, but yeah, he was saying some metaphor where it's like, yeah, it's just like the honey, it just makes the story sweet. And I was like, you son of a bitch.
He's so smooth.
uh, but yeah, with the fedora, and I guess those what I liked in the special features that he said was like, I really couldn't get a handle on like who my character was until they gave me this pinky ring, and it was like that big ass like
I
ring that
found
takes
it.
up his whole pinky, and I was like, I can kind of see that, like it kind of adds a layer of like coolness. And I mean, even if he didn't have that, he's still Tony Todd, but I really like that he's like the second in command. I think
I
he
mean, there's that here too, is that like even in older movies, like every actor was like a capital A actor, even if they were a character actor. And I do feel like that's like what Tony Todd's kind of getting at is that like a real actor, even if they only have like 3 lines, is still trying to find the entire identity of the person they play to make it real and to make it grounded. And I do feel like the henchmen of this movie, they're all those types of guys.
yeah,
They're all looking for like that one thing to get into it. And it's like when an actor is like using an accent or something, they always have some phrase that helps them like get into the voice. And for Tony Todd, it's a pinky ring sometimes, which I
I
just
know.
love. That's
That's
so
so
good.
awesome. And I guess like the Brandon Lee thing, like I know we're talking about like the Batman comparisons. I was thinking like this is like the perfect midpoint between Batman 89 and like the Batman that we just got with Robert Pattinson, which is like
Emo Batman.
emo
Yeah.
Batman, and
Yep.
then
Like
Gothic. Because I remember
eyeliner Batman,
I was like trying to describe to my friend like when I saw Pattinson's Batman. I was like, yeah, dude, it's like super like gothic. And he was like, isn't that what they did the first time? And I was like, yeah, but like, like in a
but
different,
only kinda.
like Nirvana got like
Right.
emo, like
Yeah, because he's got like the hair kind of coming down over his face, which is like
yeah,
a sort of Brandon Lee send up. And then, Brandon Lee's costume is basically what Michelle
French
Pfeiffer sews
girl,
for herself as Catwoman. So it's all like pretty unified.
and he kind of looks like Sting, like you got like kind
He
of like
does.
WWE,
Yes. Oh
like
my God, he does look like
there's just
Sting.
so many 90s kind of like vibes I was getting from this. Like I'm like, this is this like the most 90s movie that we've covered on this show? It
It
might be.
really is.
It's
I
such
know,
a
I was gonna
time
say,
capsule.
I think it could be the most 90s one. Just everything, yeah, it hits all the 90s heads on the nail. And I guess like maybe that's why it both like has aged but also hasn't really aged because it's such a perfect
'Cause you got
encapsulator.
punk rock, you got Brandon Lee, you
Yep.
got a lot of these character
Got
actors
goth
that don't
stuff.
really work in the 2000s and
Yep.
beyond. So it feels like, yeah, very far removed from the 21st century. Yeah.
Mm, and I'm cool
Um,
with that.
yeah, me too. I think it's better for it. But yeah, let's get into our next segment called The Need for Speed.
Pain don't hurt.
Hmm. In this segment, we do what the Oscars don't and honor the amazing stuntmen and women for their death defying work and pick out the punch that knocked us out the most. As you mentioned, one of the stunts didn't go the way it was supposed to, but there are
Yeah.
still a lot of incredibly fantastic stunts here. So, what are the ones that stuck out to you?
I also like one thing I want to say about that too is I feel really bad for the actor that caused it. 'Cause I was
Yes,
like when I was doing like research on it, like it was he was saying that like it like gave him nightmares for years and like
of course.
he still has never watched this movie and that he took some time off after this movie like because he felt like he couldn't be on a set. Like it was I'm just like, yeah, I can't imagine, when people talk about like the Alec Baldwin thing, I'm just like, guys, like have some empathy here, like that this guy did not intentionally try and murder somebody, and like
No,
what that would do to you if you accidentally killed somebody.
seriously.
So yeah. And so it does make the violence. I think that is one thing that makes it hard to appreciate a lot of the stunt work in here. It just does. Like it did I
Yeah.
don't for me it did for sure.
Yep.
Um, but there are still some cool stunts that I think, stand out. I'll start with number 3. I just had like the final gang showdown where like he takes out the main gang that he got revenge on. And so he's
Yes.
really at this point just like maybe I'll just take on this main guy,
Yeah. Clean it
because
up.
he's the person in charge giving out the orders. And so then like I like how he like pops up, they all just like shoot him with machine guns and they're thinking and then all of a sudden people start getting slid under the table. And there's just so many stunts in this. I just put a couple of them down. He does a backflip with two, double with pistols,
Yes.
shooting up in the sky. And then there's one where he takes a sword off the wall, uses it on somebody and then throws it and it hits the big cleanly goes on the table. And then it ends with like this really crazy rooftop chase with the helicopter. There's a lot of POV, like bird's eye view, crow shots,
Yep.
stuff like that. So I just thought that was like a really like effective sequence, even though there's some nits I'll pick with it too.
Okay.
So it can have both. It can have both.
That's true.
Number 2, I had the car chase explosion. We always love a good car chase.
Yes.
So I thought that this one was really well handled. Like again, this is like a small budget movie, so I think they made it look as expensive as they could
Yeah.
on that budget. And then I like the part where it's like it's the tweaker guy that's like following, them. Where
Yes.
bro, just go home. Like, what are you doing? Like you did not have to involve yourself in this situation at all.
No, you don't.
And then it ends with that huge explosion over the bridge. Where um Brandon Lee's character just basically booby traps this car to
Yep.
blow up this dude.
See you later, T-Bird.
And then number 1, I had the pawn shop. I really like that scene. I think it's like the first scene where you see the character like come into his own, like the crow. Like I like the little moment where like the light bulb is like on his face and he kind of like plays with it. Like
Yeah. He's
he's just
like,
so like he's so in this character. I
yes.
love it, and I like the way that he busts through the glass. It's like he doesn't like headbutt it. Like he's literally just like just
Yeah.
like
He
very
bodies it.
soft, and he does the whole like Edgar Allan Poe, did you not hear me rapping? So a raven rapped at my door,
Right.
all that stuff, and then it just ends in that huge explosion, and you find
Yeah.
out he wanted to get his wedding ring back. Very sweet meaning behind it. So those are my three stunts.
Nice.
What about you?
Yeah, those are good. I think
Yeah.
first I want to shout out to like the fun healing effects that they did. Like when they do
Oh
show
yeah.
him display that he can heal, those look really cool.
I really like the
And
one on the hand, and then he goes, Jesus Christ.
yes, right, and it's through the palm. Like
Yes, it's so
again, clever
good.
writing,
Yep.
with all of this, which is so good. I also love that nightclub mobster massacre scene.
Hmm.
Big kind of showdown that happens. I love that the pawn shop explosion. I love that he basically loads the shotgun with a
Yes.
bunch of rings, so he like uses them as like scatter shot, which I think is
Yeah.
really cool. And the fact that he just that like us, I have to assume it's a mannequin, is like
Yeah.
standing at the front when the explosion happens, and it's
Hmm.
supposed to be like him unafraid to die. Is looks really
Yeah.
badass. And Polito's character like somehow getting out the back door is like kind of nice, because I was sort of like, oh, this will be one of my deaths, and then I was like, oh man, Polito squeezes out the back. All right, okay,
I was like wondering
okay,
about that too, of like if because that does look like it's really Polito on fire. Like if they really lit, it's not on the features, but I kind of wondered that, like because it looks like
yeah.
him.
Right. If
Yeah.
not, they found a really good stunt guy, and that guy worked a bunch when Polito was working a bunch.
Yeah. I also
But yeah,
like after that too that like the main bad guy keeps fucking with him even though he has all these burns on his face. Like he's putting the hat on him. He's like, ah.
yeah, yes, he
This guy's
does.
got like second-degree burns all over his body.
It's true. It's true. Wincott has like no real loyalties. He doesn't give a shit
No,
about the guys that like work for him or help him make money or whatever. But yeah, I think the fire stunts are so good in this. Like, I also really liked
look
blowing
really
up
cool, really, really
T-Bird,
solid.
like duct taping him and all the fucking dynamite. And like when the explosion happens, it like looks like there's fireworks in it too. It's just like this big light show. And obviously they did that practically, which is incredibly dangerous, but looks so good.
Mhm.
And I think my favorite like stunt slash death, because it's like a little bit of both, is like the final impaling after the like big fight that takes place between Wincott and the Crow, Brandon Lee,
Yeah,
where he like impales him on a statue that goes through his mouth, and then the statue's mouth has a whole bunch of blood coming out of it. Just a
yeah.
fun kind of like practical looking stunt that I really liked.
You could also put too, like, because there's a lot of stunt works in that final sequence. Like it's in the church.
Yep.
Like there's like Ernie Hudson gets shot,
Yep.
and you get like the Crow just absolutely fucking up the
Yep.
girl,
Yeah.
like, poking out
Yep.
her eyes
I
after
was
she
gonna
was.
say, yeah, she goes down the like clock tower in there a lot, like
Yeah,
how the Joker or one of Joker's henchmen
Batman
goes down in
89.
Batman. Yep,
Yeah. And then Tony Todd too gets it. Like it's
yep,
yeah, all the way around.
yeah. They're all the deaths are pretty satisfying.
And there's a lot of them.
Which
It's actually a pretty high body count than I remembered. I did not remember it
yes,
being this high.
yeah, yeah. Like we were saying before, like this is a story about death and like the consequences of death in so many ways, and so of course there are a lot of satisfying but also like high body counts in here.
Or like
Which
Revenge, like we did Kill Bill, like very similar vibes. Like I just have
exactly.
this one mission, I gotta take out this team of people, and then I can start living my life again. Or in this
That's
case,
right.
I can go back into the grave
Right, I can have
again.
eternity
Yeah,
peacefully if I can take care of it.
with my bride.
Yes. All right. Well, that perfectly brings us to our next segment called Death Proof.
If he dies, he dies.
This is where we take a look at the movie's body count and see who bit the dust the hardest. Yeah, which were your favorite kills? There's a lot to choose from this week.
Well, I really liked Polito getting it through the throat with a sword, just because it's just such a funny way to kill that guy in
I
particular.
know.
Really silly. I liked the first kill of the first henchman that he killed with the knives, because it was just a cool scene overall. And then I liked how they later described it as he was stabbed in all the
Was that
major
Tintin?
organs.
Was that his name?
I
Tintin
can't
or
remember what his name was, but I think you're right. I think it was
yeah.
Tintin. I just love how Michael Kelly's like, is stabbed in the major organs in alphabetical order, like
Yeah.
as if they would tell you that detail like on an autopsy report or something. It's really
That was
funny.
just like that to me, that just felt like a noir line, you know?
Yes.
He chopped
Yes.
them up in alphabetical order, you know, like, just one of those.
Yeah, fully. But I think my favorite was the syringes because they're all to the heart and it's like a whole bunch. And then he traces the crow in blood around him, and it's just like a cool kind of looking death, also.
Yeah, so his name is Tintin too.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, number 3, I had the syringes to the chest. I just like how that one was set up.
It
I
looked
I
cool.
also thought this was very hard to watch in a certain way because I thought
Yeah, it was that guy.
it was like the dude, doesn't he look like Cobain a little bit to you?
Oh, yeah, he
And
did.
didn't the
Yeah.
girl look like Courtney Love a little bit? Like, I was like, I could see why they did that, but this might have been before Cobain died, or
I'd have to check. Yeah, I'd have to
you
take a look
know,
at that,
but it's
but
another thing that just I was like, "Ooh, this is really tough." That I get why they cast them in this way, but it also is like, now that we know what happened, would go on to happen. But yeah, that was a cool sequence, and I like that he like cleans up the mom, take.
the Cobain thing only happened 1 month before this movie was released, so they would
So
have
it was
definitely
before.
shot it
Yeah, I was gonna
before, but,
say.
like, it would have been fresh in the viewer's eyes.
Yeah. So again, the real life just bleeding into this movie. It's
Wild.
really, really crazy because that's definitely what I thought why they cast those two. There's no other way. I mean, they could have
Right,
gone through for like a Sid and Nancy thing, but they were definitely going for a more 90s vibe, as we talked about.
right.
Number 2, I also have the impaling with the blood. I really like too that because that was like a detail I noticed beforehand. They set it up really well where they show the gargoyle with the water coming out
Yes.
like raining so profusely. And so then when the death happens and it's like blood coming out, it's just like such a small detail, but they set it
I
up
love it.
beforehand. And then number 1, I really did like the Polito in the chair one. That was my number 1 just because I think that's probably the death where you get shown the most. Honestly, a lot of these are like either like off screen or like,
Yes.
even that impaling, it like happens, it doesn't show you it, but then it shows you the aftermath. But like the Polito one, it's pretty. They show the sword going through, and then it kind of like hits the floor as he like goes back, and it like keeps him standing up in the chair. Like,
Yep.
I thought that was like a really effective like visual effects, and
It's also so surprising, like, he survived this big explosion, he's, like, giving information to his boss, and his boss is like, "Later."
he's kind of a dick, though, I will say. Like, and he plays that in every movie, but like,
Right.
he's always, "What the fuck are you gonna do for me?" Like that type.
Yeah.
He's not coming with, "Please
He's
help me
not like,
out."
"Please help me," right?
Yeah. So I understand, but I do like there is some restraint because then he does spare the next guy, the who got
Yeah,
hit by
who
the
gives him
police
more
car
info. Mhm.
because he's like, I know that he's coming for you, so we're gonna kind of use you as bait. But even they
Right.
don't say any of that. But again, this is
But
like
we
the
know it.
smart writing of it.
Mhm.
They go into that. So all right. So yeah, that takes us to our next segment called Exit Wounds.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
This is where we'll talk about the film's imperfections and decide whether they are fatal hits or just minor flesh wounds. All right, what are your nitpicks here?
They're very small, I guess. Tintin being like the only black character and he dies first, not a good look. Hasn't
No,
aged the
not great.
best.
Not great.
We already talked about like the Brandon Lee and like Kurt Cobain. That stuff has not aged like very well.
Right.
With it. And then I guess the one other one that I came up was just like the female character is pretty weak. I like the kid, like you
Yeah.
said, but like the fact that we only get his fiance through like these flashbacks, it's
And that she has to also get raped, like,
true. At least they didn't show it. I was like very happy they didn't show like
yeah, it
any of
wasn't
that stuff,
super right,
you
right.
know.
Well, the implication though, and the way he captured those henchmen, like I was like, oh my god, this is like really icky.
Yeah, definitely like R-rated for sure. But yeah, I think those were all the other ones I really had. I don't know. What about you?
Same, like it's a kind of comic book situation, so I don't have like a super high bar that I'm after. I think like honestly, the main thing is like just because we had just watched Batman, I kind of was like, oh, there's like a lot of sequences in this that are just like Batman. It's like
Hmm.
very similar with its noir elements, with like the final confrontation sort of being in like a church tower type vibe, just like pieces that feel pretty similar. But even that I'm not really bothered by because it also really makes sense in this story.
I think I was thinking of like the other female interaction that like bothered me, but it's the one where like the mom makes breakfast for the kid and like is immediately forgiven, and I was like, bruh.
Well, she also like straight up has like a little like when the kid
A
doesn't
shit fit.
immediately forgive her, she's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna give it up then." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Bitch, you're supposed to have learned. You were supposed to grow and learn here. What the
Yeah, I
hell?"
think I think your kid is owed some leniency and being mad at you after like being gone all this. She's like
Thank you.
13, like you know what I mean?
Thank you.
You
Seriously.
just now want to like start making breakfast and
Yeah, and how
oh,
could you expect her to just straight up forgive you? Where you been all this time?
I
Come on.
know. Yeah, that was
That
tough,
was silly.
but
But
I don't
even
know.
she gets a little happy ending because, he tries to turn her mom around for her so that she's not going to be left alone now that he and his fiance are, not here to maybe look after her a little bit.
Yeah, and I like I said, I do like the kid kind of floating in and out of the events of it. I thought that was smart.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Which brings us to our last segment, game over, man.
What a picture.
Good picture, yeah.
That is so much fun. I love that stuff, the killing.
A lot of killing.
Yes, yes, God, that's my favorite audio cue, and it really applies so
And
well
one of our
today.
newer ones, our newest
I
one.
know. Oh man, it makes me so happy every time I hear it.
Yeah.
All right, what do you, this is where we'll rate the film out of 5 guitars. How many guitars do you give The Crow?
Yeah, I'm gonna go 3.5. I liked it. Like, it's a very tough one to even grade or like judge because, like we said, there's so many complications that happen with the movie, in and
Right.
around the movie. It feels dated in some respects, but also timeless in other aspects. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very strange movie that I'm glad has a cult following, and I think still holds up despite all of the shitty direct to DVD sequels and the remake. I do think it holds up with the action and comic book storytelling, um, in a unique way, in a ways that we don't really see outside of like maybe The Punisher,
Right.
something this dark material, um, like this graphic,
Right.
things like that. And we haven't talked about the soundtrack too, but the fact that they got like actual bands from the time, I think really works. I think that's something they're going to struggle with a lot in the new one too. Like who is going to score the,
Who are the
like
bands?
there's
Yeah.
no punk doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So I think just for all those reasons, and then just the Brandon Lee performance is just fantastic. Like I really think he did a great job, capturing that character and bringing this like psychoticness, like zaniness to it, but like controlled chaos almost. Like he's doing it to fuck with these guys
Yeah.
because he knows he can. But
Right.
then when it gets to like the kid, he's very sweet to her, and like I like that balance of it.
Yes.
And that he understands the cop was with his fiance for 72 hours or what, like yeah, there's a lot of like cool stuff in here that I just had forgotten about because I hadn't seen this in years. So I'm gonna go 3.5 guitars, little air guitar for that. What
Yes.
about
Love
you?
that. Nice. Yeah, I'm kind of going pretty similar. Just going to go 3 guitars because I think for a lot of the same reasons. I think I admire so much of, what this movie is able to do successfully. It's not exactly up my alley, like as a viewer. I feel like I rewatch it every once in a while because it is good as, an entry into filmmaking, and like it is a perfect encapsulation of like a kind of 90s movie and a kind of
Yeah,
movie that like we don't that it's hard to remake or make today.
very
So I
90s, like
do.
we said, very 90s.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Appreciate that for sure. But it's just one of those things too where I can't really return to it all the time for lots of different reasons that are not even
it's
necessarily
hard.
the movie.
It's hard.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
yeah, it's not one you really, let me throw The Crow on, just
Right. Let me pop it in the
and have a
background.
great
Right.
time. It's like, ooh, I mean, yeah, maybe in the background just for the aesthetics of it, but
Right.
just
Halloween time, I feel like every once in a while I'm like,
mm.
oh, maybe I will watch this.
I
Like,
was thinking like that would be a sweet costume if you could pull off the Brandon
yeah.
Lee outfit, and that was one of the features too, is they made a new like figure
Okay.
him, and it looks so dope. And like they showed the producer of it, and he was just like, "This is the best figure I've ever seen. Like it looks just like Brandon." And I was like, That's
Awesome.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people will be dressing up as Bill Skarsgård as the Crow. Probably
Why do
dressing
they
up as
always
him
go?
as
I feel
it,
like the
but
new thing they just did the Jared Leto Joker route. That's what it looks like.
it
Why is
does.
that the alternative to Punk? Like, why? Like, why?
I don't know, and I also don't understand why Bill Skarsgård exclusively makes
Ah,
movies in face paint nowadays. Like, if
that
there's
is
white
very
face
weird.
paint, he'll sign on, I
Oh,
guess.
there was a Pennywise
Um,
part in this too. I don't know if you caught it, where like he
oh,
starts drooling like that, and it was the
oh
exact same. And I
no,
was like, bro, the fact that he did that, and then Bill Skarsgård's the new Crow, like that's pretty crazy.
that is wild. That is wild. I mean, we'll have to see. We'll see what happens, but I do think like I don't think they're going to be able to like make some movie that I would return to before I would return to this. I feel like
Well,
I'll
in this
probably
movie,
check it out just to know, but
we've
I
seen how many
doubt.
versions of this movie since then. You know what I mean? It's like, what new element are you gonna add now? I
Yeah,
just don't.
why now? Why?
We'll see.
It's just a
We'll
lot of
see.
whys. All right, awesome. I think that wraps it up for us. Let's remind the people where they can find us.
Get your fix and follow the show at We Stay Buff on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and on Twitch at The Buffs. You can follow me on all the socials at Misfit_minded and my website, misfitminded.com. Just did a review of season 3 of The Bear. Put that up on there. Check it out. Let me know what you think.
Nice, nice. Take us for a ride and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And please leave a review. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. And you can follow me personally on all the socials at It's Me, Shani B. Next week we'll be covering Collateral, another anniversary, and I'm excited for this one because I don't think we've
Collateral.
done. Is it Michael Mann?
We have never done a Michael
Okay,
Mann
I was gonna
before.
say it is Michael
Heat,
Mann, right?
Heat is
Shit.
95. So next year we got
Okay.
Heat on the docket for sure.
Okay, good. Good. But yeah, so I'm excited for that. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time on another edition of Movie Buffs. Until then.
Bye-bye, Birdie.